I was hunched over the sonar display, watching the seafloor contours take shape on my screen. The Odysseus had been running smoothly for the past 6 hours, our research submersible making good progress through the abyssal depths of the Pacific. My finger traced a strange ridge formation that didn't match our bathymetric maps. "Gordon, take a look at this," I said, tapping the screen where an unusual geological structure was emerging. "The topography here doesn't match anything in the survey data." Gordon Gross looked up from the engineering console, his stocky frame shifting as he leaned over my shoulder. His calloused fingers adjusted a dial, enhancing the resolution. "Huh. That's odd, Tim. The structure's almost too regular to be natural." His brown eyes narrowed as he studied the readings. "Almost looks manufactured, but that's impossible at this depth." I nodded, pushing my glasses back up my nose. The rectangular frames had been sliding down all day in the humid environment of the submersible. "Jennifer, can you bring us in closer? I want better visuals on this formation." Jennifer Ward's hands moved with practiced efficiency over the pilot controls. Her black ponytail swung slightly as she made minute adjustments to our trajectory. "Adjusting course now. We'll be over the anomaly in approximately 3 minutes," she reported, her voice maintaining that steady calm that made her such an excellent pilot. I glanced around the cramped interior of our research vessel. The Odysseus was state-of-the-art, but still felt claustrophobic with 5 people working in close quarters. Johnny Santos was hunched over his biological sampling station, his salt and pepper hair catching the blue glow from his monitors. Kathleen Castro was busy at her oceanographic instruments, her slender fingers flying over her digital tablet as she recorded data. "I'm picking up unusual mineral signatures," Kathleen said without looking up. "The composition doesn't match typical deep-sea formations in this region." Johnny nodded in agreement. "Biological readings are off too. There's something different about the microbial activity down there." I felt that familiar buzz of scientific curiosity, the reason I'd become an oceanographer in the first place. After 20 years of deep-sea exploration, it was these unexpected findings that still got my heart going. "Let's make a full stop about 10 meters above the anomaly," I instructed Jennifer. "We'll run a complete sensor sweep before deciding whether to take samples." The Odysseus slowed its descent, the powerful exterior lights cutting through the absolute darkness of the deep ocean. Through the reinforced viewport, I could make out the strange geological formation below us. It wasn't just unusual, it was unlike anything I'd seen in my career. "Are you seeing this?" I asked, moving toward the viewport. The formation had a geometric quality that seemed out of place in the natural world, a series of concentric ridges with what looked like radial channels cutting through them. It reminded me of an enormous drain, though I kept that thought to myself. "I'm reading a hollow space beneath that formation," Gordon said, his voice tense. "That's not right. The density readings don't make sense." I was about to respond when the first tremor hit. The Odysseus lurched violently to starboard. Equipment crashed to the floor. Warning lights flashed across every console. "Grab something!" I shouted, lunging for a ceiling handhold as the submersible pitched wildly. Alarms blared throughout the cabin, their urgent wailing mixing with the sounds of loose items tumbling across the floor. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the handhold, watching Jennifer battle with the controls. "Thruster's not responding," she called out, her usual calm giving way to urgency. Her hands moved frantically across the pilot console. "Something's pulling us down." Gordon had managed to stay at his station, his muscular frame braced against the engineering console. "The seafloor is collapsing," he shouted over the alarms. "It's a sinkhole. The whole formation is caving in." Through the viewport, I watched in horror as the concentric ridges began to crumble, breaking apart like a shattering dinner plate. The seafloor was indeed collapsing, and we were directly above it. "Full reverse thrust," I ordered Jennifer. "Get us away from here." "I'm trying," she shouted back, her face tense with concentration. "The currents are too strong." The Odysseus spun slowly at first, then faster, caught in a powerful vortex as thousands of tons of seawater rushed into the opening chasm. We were being pulled down with it. Depth increasing rapidly, Kathleen called out, her voice tight. 800 meters, 900. The hull groaned under the increasing pressure as we spiraled deeper. Metal creaked and popped around us. One of the interior panels buckled slightly, a sight that sent ice through my veins. "The hull integrity is holding," Gordon reported, his eyes glued to the structural readouts. "But we're well beyond our operational depth now." I watched the depth gauge with growing dread. 1,200 meters. 1,300. "We're beyond the rated crush depth," Gordon said quietly. Johnny braced himself against his station. "Tim, if the hull fails..." "It won't," I cut him off, unwilling to entertain the thought of implosion. "Gordon, divert power from non-essential systems to the hull reinforcement field." Gordon nodded, his fingers dancing across his controls. "Already on it." The Odysseus continued its sickening spiral downward. Through the viewport, I could see nothing but swirling sediment and debris caught in the same vortex that trapped us. The external floodlights created a strobe-like effect that made me dizzy. "Depth gauge is maxed out," Kathleen announced, her voice hollow. "We're off the scale." Our instruments were designed for the deepest ocean trenches, yet we had fallen beyond their capacity to measure. The implications were terrifying. We were heading into uncharted territory, literally off the map. The creaking and groaning of the hull intensified. I moved to check the structural integrity monitors myself, not trusting the readouts. According to everything I knew about materials science, we should have been crushed like an empty soda can by now. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, more to myself than anyone else. "We should be..." The impact cut me off mid-sentence. The Odysseus struck something with enough force to throw all of us from our stations. I slammed into the ceiling, then crashed back to the floor as the submersible rebounded. My head struck something hard, and darkness crowded the edges of my vision. For several seconds, or minutes I couldn't tell, I lay stunned on the cold metal floor. The alarms continued their urgent wailing, but they sounded distant and muffled. Gradually, my senses returned. The taste of blood in my mouth told me I'd bitten my tongue. A throbbing pain at my temple suggested a nasty bump was forming. With effort, I pushed myself up onto my hands and knees. The emergency lighting had activated, bathing the interior in an eerie red glow. Through blurry vision, I took stock of my crew. Jennifer was slumped over the pilot console but stirring. Johnny was already on his feet, helping Kathleen up from where she'd fallen. Gordon was pinned beneath a section of collapsed ceiling panels, his face contorted in pain. "Status report," I called out, my voice raspy. "Is everyone alive?" "I'm okay," Jennifer responded, touching a cut on her forehead. "Just a knock to the head." "Bruised but functional," Johnny reported, adjusting his glasses, which had somehow remained on his face. "I think I sprained my wrist," Kathleen said, cradling her left arm. "But otherwise I'm all right." Gordon's response was a grunt of pain. "My leg," he managed through clenched teeth. "It's broken, and I'm stuck." I crawled over to him, careful to avoid the jagged metal edges of the fallen panels. Gordon's right leg was bent at an unnatural angle, and blood was seeping through his coveralls. The heavy equipment panel had him pinned from the chest down. "Johnny, help me with this," I called out. Johnny hurried over, and together we began to lift the heavy panel. Gordon's face went white with pain, but he didn't cry out. "On 3, I instructed. 1, 2, 3. We heaved the panel up and to the side. Gordon let out a sharp hiss as the pressure released from his chest and broken leg. "Thanks," he gasped. "That's better. Sort of." "We need to splint that leg and stop the bleeding," I said, looking around for the first aid kit. "Jennifer, can you check the emergency medical supplies?" Jennifer nodded and moved toward the storage compartment. I turned my attention to our surroundings, trying to assess our situation. The Odysseus had come to rest at an angle, tilted about 20 degrees to port. Most of the systems were offline, with only emergency power functioning. That's when I noticed something strange through the viewport. "Wait," I said, crawling toward the thick glass window. "That can't be right." Outside was not the inky blackness of the deep ocean, but a dimly lit, enormous cavern. The Odysseus had come to rest on what appeared to be a rocky shore, with what looked like water, actual water, not crushing high-pressure ocean, stretching away into darkness. "Kathleen," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. "Come look at this." Kathleen made her way to the viewport, cradling her injured wrist. When she saw what I was looking at, she gasped. "That's impossible," she said. "We should be crushed by pressure. There can't be an air pocket this deep." Yet the evidence was right in front of us. Somehow the Odysseus had fallen into a vast subterranean chamber. The floodlights illuminated stalactites hanging from the distant ceiling, and a body of water, a dark underground sea or lake, stretched beyond the reach of our lights. "According to our last readings, we're miles beneath the seabed," Johnny said, joining us at the viewport. "This shouldn't exist." "But it does," I replied, staring out at the impossible scene before us. Somehow we've discovered a hollow space miles beneath the ocean floor, with its own subterranean ocean. I knelt beside Gordon, checking his vitals as Jennifer returned with the emergency medical kit. His leg twisted at an unnatural angle where the ceiling panel had crushed it. His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. "How bad?" Gordon asked through gritted teeth. "Clean break, I think." I opened the med kit and pulled out the portable scanner, running it over his leg. "Tibia and fibula, but the skin's intact. We need to immobilize it." Jennifer handed me the inflatable splint while Kathleen kept Gordon's shoulders steady. Johnny held a flashlight, casting long shadows across the tilted floor of the Odysseus. "This will hurt," I warned, positioning the deflated splint under his leg. Gordon nodded, his jaw clenched. "Just do it." I worked quickly, aligning the bones as best I could before inflating the splint. Gordon's strangled cry echoed through the submersible as the pressure stabilized his leg. I administered a morphine injection, watching his face relax as the pain medication took effect. "Better?" I asked, packing away the medical supplies. "Getting there." Gordon took several deep breaths. "Now tell me how bad the ship is." I stood up, surveying the darkened control panels and blinking emergency lights. The Odysseus lay at a 15-degree angle, making movement awkward but manageable. Water trickled in from somewhere near the aft section. Not a gush, but a steady drip that couldn't be ignored. "Jennifer, run a full diagnostic. Johnny, check our oxygen reserves. Kathleen, see if you can get any of the external sensors back online." As they moved to their stations, I made my way to the main systems panel, pulling off the access hatch to examine the circuitry beneath. The sight confirmed my worst fears: scorched components and melted connections where power surges had overwhelmed the system during our descent. "Hull integrity compromised in sections 3 and 5, Jennifer called out, reading from her display. "The ballast systems are completely destroyed. Primary and secondary communications arrays are offline. and I can't get any response from the backup transmitter. Oxygen recyclers are functioning at 68% capacity, Johnny added. Environmental controls are unstable, but holding. I moved to the viewport again, pressing my hand against the thick glass. Our floodlights cast an eerie glow across the rocky shoreline where we'd come to rest. Half the submersible was in the water, half beached on the strange underground shore. "What about power?" I asked, not taking my eyes off the alien landscape outside. Jennifer's voice was tight. "The nuclear reactor housing is damaged. We're stable for now, but coolant is leaking into the secondary containment. Best estimate is 48 hours before we lose power completely." The news hit like a physical blow. 48 hours of life support in an impossible place miles below the ocean floor. I turned back to my team, their faces illuminated by the emergency lighting. "Any chance of repair?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Jennifer shook her head. "Not with the tools we have. The damage is structural." Gordon pushed himself up on his elbows, wincing. "We need to know what's out there. Maybe there's a way up." I nodded, moving to the external lighting controls. Most were dead, but 3 remained functional. I engaged them, flooding the area outside with bright light. The rocky shore extended about 50 feet before meeting the water's edge. But it wasn't ordinary rock. The surface glittered with strange mineral formations I'd never seen before, crystals and colors that shouldn't exist naturally. Along the shoreline, plant growth clung to the rocks, ferns and mosses that looked prehistoric, with structures that didn't match any modern species I knew. "Johnny, take a look at this," I called, adjusting the light angle. He joined me at the viewport, pressing his glasses higher on his nose. "Those are primitive plant forms. They look like early vascular plants, maybe from the Devonian period. This is impossible." "Add it to the list," Kathleen said dryly, joining us. "I'm getting temperature readings from outside. It's stable at about 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Atmosphere reads as oxygen-rich, but with high carbon dioxide levels. Not immediately lethal, but I wouldn't want to breathe it for long." I tapped my fingers against the control panel, thinking, "We need to map this cavern. Look for any kind of shaft or tunnel that might lead up. If there's a way in, there has to be a way out." "We'd need to go outside for that," Johnny said. "I know. We'll use the emergency breathers, take readings, and—" I stopped mid-sentence, my attention caught by movement in the water. At first I thought it was just ripples, perhaps from air currents or thermal vents. But then I saw them clearly, sleek shapes moving just beneath the surface, drawn to our lights. They circled near the shore, their scales reflecting our floodlights in metallic flashes. "Fish," Johnny whispered, leaning closer to the glass. "There are fish down here." More appeared, gathering in the illuminated area. They weren't small. The largest looked to be over 6 feet long, with streamlined bodies and fins. As they moved closer to the surface, I could make out their features more clearly. "Those jaws," Johnny said, his voice filled with academic excitement despite our situation. "The elongated body shape, that distinctive tail fin, those are xiphactinus." "What's a xiphactinus?" Jennifer asked, joining us at the viewport. Johnny's face was a mix of awe and disbelief. "A prehistoric predatory fish. They went extinct with the dinosaurs, 65 million years ago." We watched in stunned silence as more of the creatures gathered. They were the size of dolphins, but shaped like monstrous barracuda, with elongated jaws filled with needle-like teeth. They moved with the confident grace of apex predators, circling closer to where our submersible rested. "They're attracted to the light," Kathleen observed. "Or to us," I said, noticing how they seemed to be investigating the section of the hull where water was leaking in. Gordon had managed to pull himself to a sitting position against the wall. Are they dangerous? They were the wolves of the prehistoric seas, Johnny replied. Aggressive predators that would take on anything they could fit in those jaws. As we watched, the creature's behavior changed. They became more agitated, making quicker passes near the hull. One rammed against the section where water was leaking in, causing the entire submersible to shudder. They smell blood, Johnny said suddenly, pointing to a small red cloud dispersing in the water. Gordon's blood is leaking out with the water. I looked back at Gordon's splinted leg. Blood had seeped through his pants and was dripping onto the floor, mixing with the water that was trickling in. They're getting bolder, Kathleen warned as two of the larger specimens began thrashing near the shore. What happened next made my blood run cold. One of the Xiphactinus launched itself partially onto the rocky shore, its powerful tail propelling it several feet out of the water. It flopped awkwardly, jaws snapping, before sliding back into the lake. Another followed, making it even further onto land. They can come ashore, I said, watching in horror as more began to attempt the same maneuver, each getting closer to our vessel. Everyone away from the hatches and hull breaches. But they can't possibly, Jennifer began. Her words were cut short as one of the largest specimens heaved itself fully onto the shore, its muscular body undulating as it flopped toward the Odysseus with surprising speed. Inside, now, I shouted, realizing I was the only one still near the external hatch where we'd been observing. The others were already retreating to the central compartment. I slammed my hand on the emergency seal button, watching through the small window as the reinforced door slid shut just as the creature reached it. The fish slammed against the metal, its jaws scraping across the viewport with a sound like knives on glass. They're not supposed to do that, Johnny said, his scientific detachment momentarily forgotten. Xiphactinus was a purely aquatic predator. Tell them that, Jennifer replied, as more thumps reverberated through the hull. The prehistoric fish were slamming themselves against the submersible, seeking entry. We gathered in the central compartment, listening to the unnerving sounds of the creatures attacking our vessel from all sides. Through the main viewport, we could see at least a dozen of the massive fish on the shore now, their bodies glistening in the floodlights as they flopped toward us. More disturbing were the scratching sounds from the upper hatches. They were climbing up the angled hull. The seals will hold, Gordon said, though his voice lacked conviction. They're designed to withstand deep-sea pressure. But not teeth and claws, Kathleen countered, pointing to a small crack forming in one of the secondary viewports where a particularly large specimen was repeatedly ramming its head. For 15 terrifying minutes, the assault continued. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The fish nearest the viewports darted back toward the water, their retreat as coordinated as a school of modern fish evading a predator. They're leaving, Jennifer said, relief evident in her voice. No, I replied, feeling a growing sense of dread. Something scaring them away. We pressed against the main viewport, watching as the Xiphactinus scattered in all directions, disappearing into the depths of the dark underground lake. The surface of the water grew still for a moment, and then began to ripple from the center, as if something large was rising from below. There, Johnny pointed, his voice barely a whisper. A massive shadow passed beneath the surface, far larger than any of the Xiphactinus. The water bulged upward as whatever it was approached the shore. The massive shadow resolved into a nightmarish form as it breached the surface. Water cascaded off armored plates as a creature from Earth's ancient past rose before us. The monster's head was encased in thick, bony armor, its jaws lined with razor-sharp, bony ridges instead of teeth. The beast dwarfed the Xiphactinus that had scattered at its approach. This thing was easily 40 feet long, with a skull that looked like living tank armor. "My God," I whispered, my palm pressed against the cold viewport glass. "What is that?" Kathleen stepped closer, her eyes wide with recognition. "That's a Dunkleosteus, apex predator of the Devonian period." Her voice held both scientific awe and raw fear. "Those plates on its head are solid bone, evolved to crush the shells of other armored fish. Nothing could stand against it in the ancient oceans." Johnny nodded, his face pale. "The perfect killing machine. Those jaw plates could exert more force than a modern crocodile, enough to shear through anything." The beast seemed to study our vessel, its primitive eyes fixed on the Odysseus with what I could only describe as predatory interest. It circled once, twice, moving with surprising grace for something so massive. "It's sizing us up," I said quietly. "Do you think it can see us through the Dunkleosteus suddenly charged. There was no warning, just an explosion of movement as the armored fish slammed into the side of our submersible with bone-crushing force. The impact threw us all to the floor as the Odysseus rocked violently. "Everyone okay?" I shouted, pulling myself up using a ceiling handhold. A cry of pain answered me. Gordon's splinted leg had shifted during the impact, and fresh blood was seeping through the bandages. Jennifer scrambled to his side, her fingers already working to adjust the splint. "The wound reopened," she reported, her voice tight. "I need to..." Another thunderous impact rocked the vessel, cutting off her words. The Dunkleosteus was circling back for another strike. "It thinks we're either prey or competition," I realized aloud, watching the creature's movements. "And it doesn't like either option." Jennifer left Gordon with Johnny and scrambled to the controls, her hands flying across what remained of our functioning systems. "I've got partial propulsion," she called out. "The starboard thrusters are still online, but I don't know for how long." "Can we move?" I asked, joining her at the console. "Maybe, but not far and not fast." She pointed to the power readouts. "We're bleeding energy. Whatever that thing is doing to us, it's not helping our situation." Kathleen grabbed a handrail as she made her way to the main viewport, watching as the Dunkleosteus circled for another attack. "Tim, these creatures hunted by ramming their prey. It's going to keep hitting us until we break open." I knew she was right. The beast had evolved to crush the armored shells of other prehistoric creatures. Our damaged submersible wouldn't stand a chance against repeated attacks. The Dunkleosteus charged again. This time, the impact was even more devastating. Metal ground against metal as hull plates buckled. Warning lights flashed across every remaining operational panel. Gordon's voice came weakly from where he lay. "The reactor housing. It's failing." He coughed, struggling to sit up. "One more hit like that and we'll lose containment." "What does that mean?" Johnny asked, though I could tell from his expression he already knew. "It means we'd have maybe minutes before radiation floods the cabin," Gordon replied. "And that's if the whole thing doesn't go critical and blow us all to kingdom come." I pressed my hands against my temples, forcing myself to think. We needed options. Any options. "There has to be a way out of this," I muttered, scanning the cavern visible through our viewports. The underground lake stretched into darkness, with rock formations rising from the water at irregular intervals. In the distance, I noticed something unusual, a circular area where the water seemed to bubble and steam. "Look there," I said, pointing. "What's that?" Kathleen followed my gaze, squinting to see through the murky distance. "Could be a hydrothermal vent, or some kind of underwater geyser." An idea formed, desperate, probably suicidal, but better than waiting to be crushed or irradiated. If it's a geyser with enough force, could it shoot us back up toward the surface? Jennifer looked at me like I'd lost my mind. You want to ride a geyser? In a damaged submersible? You have a better idea? I countered. Because I'm open to suggestions. She shook her head. Even if it worked, the pressure changes alone could tear us apart. And staying here definitely gets us killed, I said. We need to try. Gordon called out from his position on the floor. It could work. If we can route all remaining power to the hull reinforcement field, we might survive the pressure changes. He grimaced in pain. But someone needs to manually override the safety protocols on the reactor. I'll do it, I said. Jennifer, can you get us back into the water? She turned back to the controls. If I flood the starboard ballast tanks while keeping the port tanks dry, I might be able to slide us off this ledge. But once we're in, our maneuverability will be limited. Do it, I ordered, then turned to the others. Johnny, Kathleen, we need to patch as many hull breaches as we can before we hit the water. Use whatever you can find. They nodded and quickly began gathering emergency sealant kits from the supply lockers. I made my way to Gordon, kneeling beside him. Talk me through the reactor override, I said. Despite his pain, Gordon's eyes were clear and focused. You need to get to the engineering bay. There's a red panel behind the main coolant controls. Inside is a manual override switch. Turn it clockwise until it clicks, then enter the code 72941 on the keypad that appears. What will that do? It'll bypass the safety regulators and give you direct control over the reactor output. You'll be able to divert all power to either propulsion or the hull field depending on what we need. And the radiation risk? He managed a weak smile. Increased, but if we're about to die anyway. I nodded and squeezed his shoulder before standing. Jennifer, how long until we're ready to move? 2 minutes, she called back, not looking up from her work. I'm rerouting what's left of the hydraulic system now. Johnny and Kathleen worked frantically, applying sealant patches to the worst of the hull breaches. I headed to the engineering bay at the rear of the Odysseus, finding the red panel Gordon had described. After opening it, I located the override switch and turned it until I felt a satisfying click. A keypad slid out from a hidden compartment, and I quickly entered the code. The console lit up with new options, showing direct access to the reactor's systems. I tapped the communications panel on my wrist. Gordon, I'm in. What now? Route 60% to propulsion, 40 to the hull field, he replied. Any more than that to propulsion and we risk melting the drive coils. I made the adjustments, watching as power levels shifted across the display. The lights throughout the submersible dimmed momentarily, then stabilized at a lower intensity. We're as ready as we'll ever be, I announced, returning to the main cabin. Jennifer nodded from the pilot station. Flooding starboard ballast now. Water rushed into the tanks, and I felt the Odysseus shift. There was a grinding sound as the vessel began to slide across the rocky ledge. Through the viewport, I could see the Dunkleosteus circling, its primitive brain seemingly confused by our movement. It's working, Kathleen said, watching our slow progress toward the water. With a final lurch, the Odysseus slipped from the ledge and back into the underground lake. Jennifer immediately engaged the remaining thrusters, and I felt a slight vibration as we began moving through the water. Which way to the vent? She asked. Northeast quadrant, I said, pointing toward the bubbling area I'd spotted earlier. Full power. The Dunkleosteus, sensing its prey escaping, surged forward with terrifying speed. It opened its fearsome jaw plates, ready to crush our hull, but Jennifer had anticipated the attack. She cut power for a split second, allowing the monster to shoot past us, then re-engage the thrusters. That was too close, Johnny muttered. It won't miss twice, Kathleen warned, watching as the creature banked for another approach. Jennifer pushed our damaged vessel as hard as she dared, heading for the bubbling vent. The Dunkleosteus closed in rapidly behind us, its massive form cutting through the water with prehistoric efficiency. "We're not going to make it," Jennifer said through gritted teeth. "Gordon," I called out, "can we get any more power to propulsion?" "Not without—" His words were cut short as the Dunkleosteus rammed us from below, nearly capsizing the Odysseus. The impact sent tools and equipment flying across the cabin. 70% to propulsion, Gordon shouted. "Do it now!" I rushed back to the engineering console and made the adjustment. The submersible lurched forward with renewed speed, the hull creaking ominously as we pushed beyond safe limits. "We're approaching the vent," Jennifer reported. "I can feel the current getting stronger." I rejoined the others at the viewport. The bubbling area was directly ahead, a swirling maelstrom of superheated water rising from the depths. Steam clouded our view, but there was no mistaking the raw power of the geological formation. "Everyone secure yourselves," I ordered. "This is going to be rough." I grabbed a ceiling handhold with one hand and braced Gordon with the other. Johnny and Kathleen strapped themselves into the nearest seats, while Jennifer remained at the controls, her knuckles white with tension. The Dunkleosteus charged again, its massive body a blur of armored fury. Jennifer made a final adjustment, and the Odysseus shuddered as we slid into the edge of the vent's current. The prehistoric monster missed us by inches, its jaw plates snapping shut on empty water. "Hull integrity at 30%, Gordon called out. "If we're going to do this, it needs to be now." "Full power to the hull field," I shouted. "Jennifer, take us into the center." She nodded and pushed forward on the controls. The Odysseus responded sluggishly, fighting against the swirling currents. Then, with a final surge of power, we broke through into the heart of the hydrothermal vent. The effect was immediate and violent. Superheated water blasted against our hull as tremendous pressure built beneath us. Warning alarms blared throughout the cabin as the Odysseus began to rise, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. The Dunkleosteus made one final attempt to reach us, but the force of the vent pushed it away. I caught a last glimpse of its prehistoric form before steam and bubbles obscured our view completely. "Hold on!" I yelled as the Odysseus shot upward through the vent, rattling and shaking with such force I feared it would break apart. The pressure gauge spun wildly, and I could hear the hull plates groaning under the strain. The pressure inside the Odysseus became crushing as we rocketed upward through the vent. My head smacked against a console, and I tasted blood in my mouth. The turbulence eased slightly, allowing me to check our progress on the navigation display. "We're moving, but not fast enough," I said, wiping blood from my lip. The screen showed our trajectory through the underwater geyser system, a network of volcanic vents that might lead us back to the ocean floor. "How's our speed, Jennifer?" Jennifer gripped the controls with white knuckles. 20 knots, but we're fighting the current. The submersible wasn't built for this kind of ascent. I leaned over her shoulder to study the readout. At this rate, we'd be stuck in these underwater tunnels for hours, if the hull held together that long. "Tim," Kathleen called from the sensor station, her voice cracked with urgency. "Look at this." I made my way to her station, grabbing handholds as the Odysseus rocked. The sonar display pulsed with a large mass moving rapidly behind us. "Is that—" "The Dunkleosteus," she confirmed. "It's following us up the vent, and it's gaining." Johnny joined us, his glasses askew. "That's impossible. No creature should be able to withstand those pressure changes." "Tell that to the prehistoric monster," I said. "How long until it reaches us?" Kathleen's fingers flew across the keyboard. "At current speeds? Less than 10 minutes." A groan from the medical bay reminded me of Gordon's condition. He lay strapped to the emergency cot, his face gray with pain despite the morphine. "Jennifer, can we get more speed?" I asked. She shook her head. "The reactor's already redlining. We push it any harder and we'll lose containment." I studied the navigational chart, looking for options. The tunnel we traveled through branched ahead into 3 passages. The central one appeared to lead toward a larger chamber. "Take the middle passage," I instructed Jennifer. "It might open into something we can use." As Jennifer adjusted our course, Kathleen called out again, "Tim, I'm getting strange thermal readings from that chamber ahead. Extreme temperature fluctuations." I moved back to her station. The thermal imaging showed a massive heat signature pulsing at regular intervals. "It's a geyser," Kathleen said. "A big one. And based on these readings, it appears to be in an eruption cycle." "How frequently?" I asked. "Every 8 to 10 minutes. Water temperature during eruption exceeds 400 degrees Celsius." Johnny let out a low whistle. "If we hit that during an eruption, we'd be boiled alive," I finished. The Odysseus shuddered as we entered the middle passage. The tunnel widened, revealing a massive underwater chamber ahead. Through the viewport, I saw a circular depression in the chamber floor, the mouth of the geyser. "When was the last eruption?" I asked Kathleen. She checked her readings. "About 2 minutes ago. We have 6 to 8 minutes before the next one." I watched as bubbles began rising from the geyser mouth. Small at first, then larger. Behind us, the sonar showed the Dunkleosteus still in pursuit, closing the gap. A plan formed in my mind. Risky, possibly suicidal, but potentially our only chance. "Jennifer, take us directly over that geyser vent," I said. She turned to stare at me. "You want us to go over the thing that could cook us alive?" "Trust me. I need you to position us about 20 meters above the vent mouth, then be ready to cut power on my mark." Gordon called weakly from his cot. "What are you planning, Tim?" "Our friend back there is still following us," I explained, "and it's faster in the water than we are. But if we can time this right..." Understanding dawned on Jennifer's face. "You want to use the geyser against it." "Exactly. We position ourselves over the vent, let it charge us, then move at the last second. If we time it right, the geyser erupts just as it reaches the vent." "And if we time it wrong?" Johnny asked. "Then we join our prehistoric friend in becoming well done," I admitted. Kathleen looked up from her instruments. "Tim, the temperature is already rising in the chamber. Pre-eruption phase is beginning." "Jennifer, get us in position," I ordered. "Everyone else, secure yourselves. This is going to get rough." Jennifer navigated the Odysseus into position above the geyser vent. Through the viewport, I could see the depression clearly now, a massive circular pit in the rock floor, easily 50 meters across. Bubbles streamed upward with increasing frequency, and the water around the vent had taken on a cloudy appearance from the minerals. "Sonar contact closing fast," Kathleen reported. "The Dunkleosteus will be on us in less than a minute." "How long until eruption?" I asked. "Thermal readings suggest about 90 seconds, but it's not an exact science." I moved to the main viewport, watching as the massive armored fish appeared at the entrance to the chamber. Even at this distance, I could make out its bone-plated head and powerful jaws. It paused, as if assessing the situation, then surged forward with terrifying speed. "It's coming straight for us," Johnny said. "Hold position," I instructed Jennifer. "Wait for my signal." The seconds crawled by as the monster closed the distance. 50 meters. 40. 30. "Tim." Jennifer's voice was tense. "Not yet." The Dunkleosteus was 20 meters away, its jaws opening wide. "Cut power, now!" I shouted. Jennifer slammed the controls forward, and the Odysseus's engines went silent. Our momentum carried us forward slightly, but we began to slow dramatically. The Dunkleosteus, expecting us to maintain our speed, surged forward to intercept us where we would have been. Instead, it shot past our bow, directly over the geyser vent. "Kathleen," I called. "Temperature spiking. Eruption imminent."
"Full power! Jennifer, give it everything!" Jennifer yanked the controls back, and the engines roared to life. The Odysseus lurched forward just as the Dunkleosteus turned back toward us. The water beneath the creature began to churn violently. Bubbles exploded upward, and then a massive column of superheated water erupted from the vent. The Dunkleosteus was caught directly in the blast. Its massive body twisted and thrashed as the scalding water engulfed it. A horrible sound, half screech, half roar, reverberated through the water, transmitted through our hull. "We're clear of the main blast," Jennifer reported, "but the currents got us." The force of the eruption created a powerful upward current that caught the Odysseus and hurled us toward a narrow opening in the chamber ceiling. We spun wildly as we were sucked into what appeared to be a natural lava tube. "Hull temperature rising," Kathleen shouted over the alarms. "The water around us is nearly boiling." "Divert all remaining power to the hull reinforcement field," I ordered. The Odysseus shot upward through the narrow tube, scraping and banging against the rocky walls. I lost my footing and crashed hard against the bulkhead. Pain exploded in my shoulder, but I forced myself back up. Through the viewport, I caught glimpses of the tube walls rushing past at terrifying speed. The water grew increasingly turbulent, filled with bubbles and debris. "Pressure dropping rapidly," Johnny called out. "We're ascending too fast." The submersible spun again, sending equipment flying across the cabin. I heard Gordon cry out as he was jostled in his restraints. "Brace for impact," I shouted as I saw the tube narrow ahead of us. We slammed into the constriction with bone-jarring force. Metal screamed against rock as the Odysseus wedged itself momentarily, then broke free as the pressure behind us built. With a final violent surge, we were ejected from the tube and sent tumbling through open space. For a sickening moment, we were in free fall. Then came the impact, a massive crash that threw me across the cabin. My head struck something hard, and darkness swallowed my vision. I came to with Johnny shaking my shoulder. Tim, can you hear me?" I blinked, trying to clear my vision. "What happened? Where are we?" "You need to see this," he said, helping me to my feet. My head throbbed as I made my way to the viewport. What I saw made me question if I was still unconscious. The Odysseus lay tilted on its side in a massive cavern, but unlike the underwater chamber we'd left, this one contained no water. We were completely on dry land, surrounded by rock formations illuminated by bioluminescent fungi that clung to the walls and ceiling. "How is this possible?" I asked. Kathleen joined us at the viewport. We appear to have been expelled from the geyser system into an air-filled cavern. The readings confirm breathable atmosphere outside, though with high CO2 levels. "What about the Dunkleosteus?" I asked. "No sign of it," Johnny said. "If it survived the geyser, it's still in the water system below." A series of alarms cut through our conversation. Jennifer was at the engineering station, frantically working the controls. "The reactor's failing," she reported. "That last impact must have damaged the containment system. We're down to emergency power only." I moved to check on Gordon. His condition had deteriorated significantly. His skin was clammy and his breathing shallow. The improvised splint on his leg had shifted during our violent journey, and fresh blood stained the bandages. "How is he?" I asked Jennifer as she joined me.
"Not good," she said quietly. "He needs medical attention we can't provide here. And without the reactor, life support systems will fail within hours." I looked around the cabin. The Odysseus, our lifeline and only way home, lay broken beyond repair. The reality of our situation hit me like a physical blow. "We need to find another way out," I said, "and we need to do it on foot." Johnny had moved to the airlock, checking the exterior readings. "The atmosphere is breathable, though I recommend we use the emergency oxygen masks until we know what's out there. Temperature outside is about 18 degrees Celsius. Let's gather whatever supplies we can carry," I instructed. "Medical kits, emergency rations, the portable science equipment. We need to be ready to move as soon as possible." As the others prepared, I helped Jennifer stabilize Gordon for transport. We fashioned a stretcher from a section of wall paneling and secured him with straps from the emergency harnesses. Johnny returned from checking the airlock exterior. "There's what looks like a natural tunnel leading away from this chamber. It might be our best bet." "Any sign of water? A way back to the ocean?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not that I could see. But I found something else near the tunnel entrance. You should come look." I followed Johnny outside the Odysseus. The air was damp and warm, with a faint smell of sulfur. The cavern stretched about 100 meters in each direction, with our submersible near the center where we'd crashed. Johnny led me to a section of wall near what appeared to be a tunnel entrance. He shined his light on the rock surface. "Look at this," he said. Embedded in the rock were fossilized remains, bones pressed into the stone. But these weren't fish or other marine creatures. The skeletal structure was unmistakable, a human or humanoid hand reaching out from the wall. Next to it, the outline of a skull, jaw open in what looked like a final scream. "These are human remains," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Johnny nodded. "Or something very close to human. And based on the fossilization, they've been here for thousands of years." I stared at the grim discovery. Someone found this place before us. "And they never made it out," Johnny added. I ran my fingers over the fossilized hand, feeling the smooth contours of bone turn to stone. Whoever these remains belonged to, they had died here, trapped in this underground world just as we now were. The fossilized remains sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the cavern's temperature. I pulled my hand away from the stone-like fingers and stood up, my mind racing with implications. "We need to get moving," I said, turning back to the damaged Odysseus. "Gordon's condition is getting worse, and we're not going to last long without proper supplies." The submersible lay on its side like a beached whale, emergency lights flickering weakly through the viewport. The reactor housing had completely failed during our violent ascent through the geyser, leaving us with only the backup batteries, which wouldn't last more than a few hours. Johnny, helped me gather everything useful from the Odysseus. Kathleen, stay with Gordon and monitor his vitals. Inside the tilted cabin, I made quick decisions about what we could carry. The emergency supply locker had been designed for surface excursions, not extended underground survival. I grabbed the waterproof pack containing emergency rations, enough for 5 people for about 3 days if we rationed carefully. Jennifer collected the portable medical kit while Johnny gathered the scientific equipment. "What about the emergency beacon?" Jennifer asked, reaching for the bright orange device. I shook my head. "Save the wait. We're miles below the ocean floor. No signals getting through all this rock." Johnny carefully packed the portable atmospheric analyzer, soil testing kit, and his specimen collection tools. "These readings could help us understand what we're dealing with," he said. "Take the handheld lights too," I added, "and all the batteries you can find." We worked methodically, filling our packs with survival essentials. I found 4 emergency breathers with oxygen canisters, not enough for a long-term solution, but potentially useful if we encountered toxic air pockets. Jennifer located the emergency toolkit containing basic repair implements that might serve as makeshift weapons if needed. After 20 minutes, we had stripped the Odysseus of anything immediately useful. I did a final sweep, locating the submersible's logbook, a hard copy backup of our expedition data that might prove valuable. As I grabbed it, my eyes fell on a framed photo on the wall. Our team at the launch ceremony 6 days ago, smiling with no idea what awaited us. Back outside, Kathleen knelt beside Gordon, whose condition had deteriorated. His face was flushed with fever, and his breathing had become shallow and rapid. The broken leg wasn't our only concern anymore. The injury had become infected, despite the antibiotics we'd administered hours earlier. "His temperature's rising," Kathleen reported. "The antibiotics aren't working. We need to get him proper medical attention." I nodded grimly. "We'll need to move him. Johnny, help me find something we can use as a stretcher." We returned to the Odysseus and removed one of the narrow access panels from the lower corridor. It was lightweight, but sturdy enough to support Gordon's weight. We padded it with insulation material torn from the walls and secured handholds using strips of safety webbing. "This should work," I said, testing its strength. Transferring Gordon to the makeshift stretcher proved challenging. He groaned in pain despite our careful movements, his eyes fluttering open briefly. "Hang in there, Gordon," I told him. "We're going to find a way out." His only response was a weak nod before he slipped back into a feverish half-consciousness. Jennifer administered another dose of painkillers and antibiotics, but the medical supplies were limited. We needed to find help, or an exit, soon. While Johnny and Jennifer secured Gordon to the stretcher, I joined Kathleen, who had returned to examining the fossilized remains. "What do you make of them?" I asked. Kathleen carefully documented the findings with our portable scanner. "The fossilization process appears advanced. These remains could be thousands of years old, but the bone structure is unmistakably human or very close to it. Meaning someone found this place long before modern exploration was possible," I said. "Exactly. And they never made it back to tell anyone." She pointed to marks on the cavern wall near the remains. "See those? They look like someone tried to carve something. Maybe a message or warning." I ran my fingers over the faint indentations. They weren't natural formations, but deliberate marks made by tools. My scientific curiosity battled with a growing sense of unease. With Gordon secured on the stretcher, I unpacked the atmospheric analyzer and began taking readings of the air around us. The device hummed softly as it processed the samples. "Oxygen levels at 23%, I announced, reading the display. "Higher than Earth's surface, carbon dioxide at 3%, elevated but not immediately dangerous, trace amounts of methane and hydrogen sulfide." Johnny looked over my shoulder at the readings. "That's not a random mixture. This atmosphere is being actively maintained somehow." I nodded, processing the implications. The air composition and the fossilized remains suggest this isn't just a random cavern. It's part of an extensive underground network. Taking additional readings from different spots in the cavern confirmed my theory. The air composition was relatively consistent, with subtle variations that indicated air circulation through a larger system. "These gas ratios and mineral compositions," I said, examining the data. "They're consistent with volcanic activity. This entire network was likely formed by ancient magma flows that created these chambers and tunnels before cooling." Johnny pointed to the smooth sections of the cavern walls. "The basic structure, yes. But look at the wear patterns here and here. These weren't just formed by lava flow. Some of these passages appear to have been widened. I directed my light toward where he was pointing. The rock surface showed unusual patterns of wear that didn't match natural erosion processes. They resembled tool marks, crude but deliberate. "You're right," I agreed. Something or someone modified these tunnels. "Primitive tools," Johnny suggested, tracing his fingers along the marks. "Not modern equipment." Jennifer, who had been checking Gordon, joined us. "Are you saying people live down here?" "I'm saying something intelligent enough to use tools spent time here," I replied. "Whether they lived here or were trapped like us remains to be seen." With Gordon's stretcher ready and our supplies packed, we needed to make a decision about which way to go. The cavern had 3 visible exits, the hole we'd emerged from, which led back to the flooded chamber, and 2 tunnels leading deeper into the rock. "That one," I said, pointing to the larger of the 2 tunnels. "The air seems to be flowing from that direction, which suggests it connects to a larger space." Johnny and I took the front ends of Gordon's stretcher, while Jennifer took the rear. Kathleen walked ahead with one of the portable lights, illuminating our path. The tunnel was roughly oval in shape, large enough for us to walk upright with room to spare on either side. As we moved deeper, I noticed the air growing noticeably warmer. The atmospheric analyzer confirmed a 2-degree increase in temperature for every 100 meters we traveled. The oxygen levels were also rising slightly. "The temperature gradient suggests a heat source deeper in the system," I said. "And these oxygen levels aren't natural. Something is generating it." "Plant life?" Jennifer suggested. "On a massive scale, if that's the case," Johnny replied. After walking for about 20 minutes, the tunnel began to widen further. The ceiling rose above us, and the walls curved outward. The rock transitioned from bare stone to patches of strange, pale moss that glowed with faint bioluminescence, providing just enough light to see without our portable lights. "Incredible," Johnny murmured, pausing to examine the glowing growth. "This species isn't in any known database." The tunnel continued to expand until we reached what appeared to be the entrance to a much larger chamber. The sound of dripping water echoed from somewhere ahead, and the air felt more humid. "Wait," I said, holding up my hand. "Let me check the air composition again before we go further." The reading showed oxygen levels had climbed to nearly 25%, with carbon dioxide holding steady at 3%. The temperature had increased to a comfortable 72 degrees Fahrenheit. "It's safe," I confirmed. "Better than safe. It's ideal for supporting complex life." We stepped through the entrance, and all of us stopped in our tracks. The chamber that opened before us was enormous, at least the size of a football stadium, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. But what stunned us wasn't the size. It was what filled it. The entire chamber was illuminated by blue-green light emanating from massive fungi that blanketed the ceiling like stars in a night sky. Their glow cast everything in an ethereal light that made the scene before us seem like something from another world. And in a way, it was. Below the glowing ceiling stretched an impossible jungle. Thick ferns that reached waist height, towering plants resembling ancient cycads, and tree-like structures with thick, ribbed trunks that branched into canopies of feathery fronds. It was like stepping into a prehistoric forest that had no business existing miles beneath the ocean floor. "This can't be real," Jennifer whispered. "It's a Devonian-era ecosystem," Johnny said, his voice filled with academic awe despite our situation. "Plants that went extinct 360 million years ago." Kathleen had moved to the edge of the jungle, scanning with her portable device. "The soil composition is rich with nutrients, and there's a water source. I can hear running water deeper in." I noticed movement among the ferns about 30 feet away. something small and quick, darting between the plants. Then another movement in a different direction. Our lights had disturbed whatever lived here. "Did you see that?" I asked, pointing toward the movement. Johnny nodded. "Small reptiles, from what I could tell. Possibly early dinosaur relatives." I caught a clearer glimpse of one creature as it paused momentarily before disappearing into the underbrush. About the size of a house cat, with a long tail and scaled skin, moving on two legs with surprising agility. It looked like a miniature dinosaur straight from a museum exhibit. "We need to set up a safe area," I said, bringing us back to our immediate concerns. "Gordon needs rest, and we could all use some too." We found a relatively clear area near the chamber entrance where the rock floor extended about 20 feet before the jungle began. It offered us a defensible position with our backs to the solid rock wall. We laid Gordon's stretcher down carefully and set up a small perimeter of lights. Gordon's condition hadn't improved. His skin was hot to the touch, and his breathing was labored. Jennifer checked his wound, carefully removing the bandage to reveal angry red skin around the break. "The infection's spreading," she said quietly. "We've given him the strongest antibiotics we have, but without proper medical equipment." She didn't need to finish the thought. We all understood what she meant. I took first watch while the others tried to rest. Johnny insisted on setting up his equipment to analyze soil and plant samples he'd collected near our camp. Kathleen had fallen into an exhausted sleep, while Jennifer sat beside Gordon, monitoring his condition. The strange jungle beyond our light perimeter was alive with sounds, chirps, rustles, and occasional calls unlike anything I'd heard on the surface. I found myself cataloging them, trying to match them to known animal sounds and failing. That's when I heard it, a different sound altogether. Not the light movements of the small creatures we'd glimpsed, but something larger pushing through the vegetation maybe 50 yards from our position. The ferns swayed in a pattern that indicated deliberate movement, not just air currents. I reached for the makeshift spear we'd fashioned from a broken equipment rod, my eyes fixed on the spot where the movement had occurred. The sound came again, a low, huffing breath followed by the distinct crack of a branch. Gordon's condition seemed to worsen by the minute. His breathing had become more shallow, and Jennifer shook her head grimly when I glanced her way. I turned back toward the jungle, listening intently. The movement had stopped, but I could sense something watching us from just beyond where our light reached. Something that was deciding what to do about the strange new creatures that had invaded its territory. The sound came again, closer this time. A branch snapped sharply, followed by that same huffing breath. Whatever was out there was getting bolder. I was about to stand up when Johnny shook my shoulder. "Tim," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "It's Gordon." I turned from the jungle edge to see Johnny's face, illuminated by the soft blue glow of the bioluminescent fungi. His expression told me everything before he spoke another word. His fever spiked, way past what our meds can handle. I hurried over to where Gordon lay on the makeshift stretcher. Jennifer was kneeling beside him, a hand on his forehead. Gordon's skin glistened with sweat in the dim light, his breathing rapid and shallow. "How bad?" I asked, though I could already see the answer. 104.3, Jennifer said, holding up the small medical scanner. "The antibiotics aren't touching whatever infection he's got. His leg's worse too." I looked at Gordon's leg. Even in the low light, I could see the angry red streaks extending upward from the break site. The skin around his shin was swollen and discolored. "We need something stronger," I said, running through our limited options. The medical kit from the Odysseus was basic, designed for temporary treatment until proper medical help could be reached. We were far beyond its capabilities now. The kit was designed for surface emergencies, not treating infections from microorganisms that had been extinct for millions of years. "What about those fungi you spotted earlier?" Johnny asked, turning to Kathleen. Kathleen nodded eagerly. "I saw several varieties that resemble medicinal species from the surface. Some fungi produce natural antibiotics. It's how we discovered penicillin in the first place." I considered our options. Gordon's condition was deteriorating by the hour. We couldn't wait for rescue that might never come. "How confident are you?" I asked Kathleen. "The structural similarities are promising," she said. "I've studied mycology extensively for my oceanographic research. Several specimens I saw deeper in the jungle had characteristics similar to fungi we use for antibiotics today." I glanced back at the jungle edge where I'd heard the sounds earlier. Whatever was out there would still be waiting, but Gordon wouldn't last without intervention. "We need to try," I decided. "Jennifer, can you stay with Gordon? Keep cooling him down and monitor his vitals." Jennifer nodded. "I'll do what I can, but hurry back. We're almost out of fever reducers." "Johnny, Kathleen, grab your collection tools and lights. We're going to find something to help him." I picked up one of the portable lights in my pack. After a moment's consideration, I also took the emergency flare gun. It was the closest thing to a weapon we had. "Be careful," Jennifer called as we prepared to leave. "And Tim? Don't take too long." I nodded, understanding the weight of her words. Every minute counted for Gordon now. The three of us moved deeper into the prehistoric landscape, away from our makeshift camp near the cavern entrance. The jungle grew thicker as we progressed, the bioluminescent fungi casting everything in an eerie blue glow that made shadows dance with each step. "This vegetation shouldn't exist," Johnny murmured as he cataloged plants with his handheld scanner. "Look at these ferns. They match Glossopteris specimens from the Permian period. They went extinct 250 million years ago." Kathleen paused to examine a tall plant with segmented stems. "Calamites," she identified. "Prehistoric horsetails. The modern versions are tiny compared to these." I kept my eyes on our surroundings as they worked. The jungle felt alive in a way that was both fascinating and terrifying. Insects larger than any I'd seen on the surface buzzed around us. Small reptilian creatures scurried away from our lights. "Over here," Kathleen called, stopping to examine something at the base of a tree. "This is promising, a polypore species, related to modern bracket fungi that have proven medicinal properties." Johnny joined her, taking samples and placing them carefully in collection containers. "Not enough for what we need, though," he said after assessing the growth. We pressed on, moving deeper into the jungle. The air grew warmer and more humid, thick with unfamiliar scents of decomposition and growth. I heard water running somewhere ahead, suggesting a stream or small river. A rustling sound to our left made me stop suddenly. I held up my hand, signaling Johnny and Kathleen to freeze. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. "Something big," Johnny confirmed, his voice barely audible. We stood motionless, listening. The rustling came again, moving parallel to us, just out of sight in the dense vegetation. "It's following us," Kathleen whispered. "Let's keep moving," I said after a moment. "But stay close." We continued more cautiously, the weight of the flare gun reassuring in my pocket. The sounds persisted, sometimes fading, then returning closer than before. Whatever was tracking us was intelligent enough to stalk rather than charge. "There," Kathleen suddenly pointed ahead. "That fallen log. Look at the fungi growth." About 20 yards ahead, a massive tree trunk lay across our path, covered in a variety of mushroom-like growths. even from this distance, I could see they were unlike anything on the surface. Larger, more vibrant, with complex structures. "This is exactly what we need," Kathleen said as we approached. "These appear to be ancestors of Penicillium and Cephalosporium, both powerful natural antibiotic producers." Johnny immediately began collecting samples, carefully placing specimens in sterile containers. "If we can extract the compounds back at camp, we might be able to create something to fight Gordon's infection." I kept watch while they worked, scanning the jungle around us. The rustling had stopped, which concerned me more than when we could track it. The silence felt deliberate. "How much do you need?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "Just a bit more," Kathleen replied, focused on selecting the best specimens. "The concentration of active compounds appears extremely high. These fungi have likely been evolving in isolation for millions of years." As Johnny and Kathleen finished collecting samples, a new sound cut through the humid air, a sharp, rhythmic clicking, not insect-like, but purposeful, communicative. I froze, my hand moving slowly toward the flare gun. "Don't move," I breathed. The clicking continued, now coming from multiple directions. Johnny and Kathleen stood perfectly still, their eyes wide with recognition of the danger. The dense vegetation about 15 yards ahead of us began to part. Slowly, deliberately. First one snout appeared, then a head, then the full body of a creature that should have been long extinct. It stood about 3 feet tall at the shoulder, bipedal, with powerful hind legs and smaller forelimbs. Its skin was covered in iridescent scales that shifted from green to blue in the bioluminescent light. A row of feather-like structures ran along its spine. But it was the eyes that held my attention, forward-facing, predatory, and filled with unmistakable intelligence. "Troodon," Johnny whispered, his voice barely audible. "One of the most intelligent dinosaur species ever to exist. Brain-to-body ratio comparable to some birds of prey." 5 more creatures emerged from the vegetation, spreading out in a loose semicircle. They moved with coordinated precision, their heads bobbing in bird-like motions as they assessed us. The lead Troodon tilted its head, studying us with disturbing intensity. It made another series of clicks, and the others responded, beginning to circle us methodically. "They're hunting us," Kathleen whispered. "Using pack tactics." I slowly reached for the flare gun, calculating our chances. 6 against 3, and they clearly knew this environment better than we did. Our only advantage might be that they'd never encountered humans before. My hand closed around the flare gun, but I froze before drawing it. Something about 2 of the creatures wasn't right. Across the back of the lead Troodon, and another to its left, were what appeared to be crude harnesses made of leather straps. The material was weathered but unmistakably manufactured. "Do you see that?" I whispered, hardly believing my eyes. Johnny followed my gaze, his expression shifting from fear to shock. "Those are harnesses, man-made." "That's impossible," Kathleen breathed. "Unless..." The implications hit us simultaneously. We weren't the first humans to find this place. Someone had been here before us, long enough to not only survive but to apparently domesticate some of these creatures. The lead Troodon took a step closer, its intelligent eyes fixed on mine. The harness across its back had worn grooves into its scales, suggesting it had been wearing it for a long time. This wasn't a wild animal. It was someone's trained hunting companion. I slowly moved my hand away from the flare gun, realizing that firing it might be the worst possible response. These weren't mindless predators. They were tools, extensions of some unknown human presence. "Don't make any sudden movements," I said quietly. "I think they're deciding what to do with us." I kept my hand away from the flare gun, studying the Troodon more carefully. The leather harnesses weren't crude at all. They showed skilled craftsmanship with precise stitching and fitted straps that wrapped around the creature's torsos without restricting movement. Small metal buckles caught the light from our lamps, too uniform to be handmade. Someone with access to tools had created these. "Johnny, Kathleen," I said under my breath, "don't make any sudden movements. These aren't wild animals." Johnny nodded almost imperceptibly, his collection tools still clutched in white-knuckled hands. Kathleen stood frozen, her eyes darting between the 6 creatures as they maintained their circle around us. I noticed more details about the harnesses now. There were small pouches attached to the sides, storage compartments. One of the Troodon had what looked like a metal tube strapped to its back. These weren't just restraints. They were functional equipment designed by someone who understood both the animal's anatomy and how to use them as helpers. The creatures continued their clicking sounds, heads bobbing as they watched us. Their movements were too coordinated to be random. They weren't attacking, which meant they were waiting for something or someone. "I'm going to try something," I whispered. "Stay absolutely still." I slowly bent my knees, making my movements deliberate and non-threatening. The lead Troodon, larger than the others with distinctive blue markings along its neck, tracked my movement with unnerving intelligence. Its eyes blinked, pupils contracting as it assessed me. Keeping my gaze locked with the creatures, I carefully lowered myself until I was kneeling. The fungi samples we'd collected were still in my hand. I placed them on the ground between us and pushed them forward slightly. "What are you doing?" Kathleen whispered. "Offering a gift," I replied softly. "If these creatures are trained, someone trained them. I want to show we're not a threat." The lead Troodon tilted its head, then took 3 precise steps forward. It lowered its snout to the fungi, sniffing with quick inhalations. The other Troodon maintained their positions, but their posture changed. Less aggressive, more curious. After examining our offering, the lead Troodon straightened and made a new sound. Not the threatening clicks from before, but a clear, melodic whistle that cut through the humid air of the cavern. We waited, the silence stretching uncomfortably. Then, from deeper in the jungle, came a response. Not an animal call, but unmistakably human. "Stay back," a man's voice, rough with age but distinctly human. "Don't move." Johnny tensed beside me. "Someone else is down here," he said unnecessarily, his voice a mix of relief and new apprehension. The vegetation about 20 yards ahead parted, and a figure stepped into view. He was tall and thin, wearing what had once been expedition clothing, now patched and modified with animal skins. His gray hair hung past his shoulders, matched by a beard that reached his chest. He carried a spear in one hand, the tip fashioned from what looked like a sharpened piece of metal. But what struck me most was his eyes, bright and alert, taking in every detail of our group. The Troodon immediately responded to his presence, 2 of them breaking formation to move to his side. He placed a weathered hand on the head of the nearest one, a gesture of familiarity. "Americans?" he asked, his English accented but clear. I nodded, still kneeling. "Yes, we're scientists. Our submersible crashed." He studied us for a long moment, then lowered his spear. "I am Hiroshi Yamamoto. Once I was with Tokyo University Marine Science Division." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "That was 15 years ago." I slowly stood, keeping my movements measured. "I'm Tim Mitchell. This is Johnny Santos and Kathleen Castro. We have 2 more people back at our camp, one seriously injured." Hiroshi approached cautiously, the Troodon flanking him like trained guard dogs. Up close, I could see the patchwork nature of his clothing, pieces of standard expedition wear combined with what looked like leather made from unknown animals. A watch still circled his wrist, though I doubted it had worked in years. "The fungi," he said, pointing to our samples on the ground. "You seek medicine?" "Yes," Kathleen answered. "Our engineer has a compound fracture. The infection is spreading fast." Hiroshi nodded. "Sepsis is common here. The bacteria, unusual strains." He whistled sharply, and the Troodon immediately backed away, creating a path. "Come, I help." "How did you end up here?" I asked as we followed him deeper into the jungle. Hiroshi pushed aside a massive fern. "Same as you. Research vessel, storm. We found strange readings and sent submersible to investigate." He pointed upward. Cavern pulled us in. Only 3 of us survived initial crash. Now only me from my expedition. "But how have you survived for 15 years?" Johnny asked, his scientific curiosity overcoming his caution. "Not alone," Hiroshi replied. "Others. You'll see." We walked for about 10 minutes, the path winding through increasingly dense vegetation. The bioluminescent fungi grew more prevalent, casting an eerie blue-green light that supplemented our portable lamps. The Troodon kept pace with us, 2 leading the way and the others following behind. "The Troodon," I said. "You've trained them?" Hiroshi smiled for the first time, revealing surprisingly well-maintained teeth. "Not me. They were already trained when I arrived. I learned their commands. They are intelligent, more than any animal you know above." Before I could ask what he meant by that, the jungle opened up into a clearing. What I saw stopped me in my tracks. A camp. No, more than a camp. A small settlement had been built in the shelter of the cavern wall. Structures made from salvaged metal, wood, and animal hides stood in a rough semicircle. A fire burned in a central pit, the smoke channeled up through a crack in the distant ceiling. Equipment from various eras was visible. Pieces of what might have been from the 1970s alongside more modern technology. And people. There were people moving among the structures. "How many?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. 11 now, Hiroshi replied. "Oldest arrived in 1976. Newest before you came 3 years ago." He gestured toward the settlement. All thought dead above. As we approached, the people stopped their activities to stare. They were a diverse group, different ages, ethnicities, all wearing the same patchwork clothing style as Hiroshi. Some looked almost normal, while others had adapted more fully to this underground life, with longer hair and beards, skin pale from lack of sunlight. "You mentioned our injured man," Hiroshi said. "How far to your camp?" I snapped back to our immediate problem. "About 20 minutes back the way we came." Hiroshi nodded and called out to a woman sorting through plants near one of the structures. They conversed rapidly in Japanese, and she immediately began gathering materials. "Naoko was doctor before," Hiroshi explained. "We prepare medicine, then go to your friend." While the woman worked, Hiroshi led us to what appeared to be his personal quarters, a structure built partly into the cavern wall, reinforced with salvaged metal panels. Inside was a shock of organized chaos. Scientific equipment, some I recognized and some I didn't, lined makeshift shelves. Notebooks filled with handwritten observations were stacked neatly. A table held what looked like dissection tools and specimen jars. "You've been conducting research all this time," Johnny said, impressed. Hiroshi nodded. "What else to do? I study. I learn." He pulled down a notebook and handed it to me. 15 years of observations. The ecosystem here, it's impossible. Species that never existed together, now adapted to shared environment. I flipped through pages of meticulous notes and detailed drawings of plants, animals, and geological formations. "This is incredible work," I said sincerely. "Meaningless if never shared," he replied, his tone matter-of-fact rather than self-pitying. A man in his 60s approached the entrance, carrying a leather pouch. He had the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades outdoors, though down here that was impossible. "Medicine's ready," he said with an Australian accent. Hiroshi took the pouch. "This is Malcolm. His research vessel disappeared in 1994. Malcolm nodded at us. "Welcome to the Hotel California, mates. You can check in anytime you like." "But you can never leave," Johnny finished, his face pale. "That's right, son," Malcolm said, not unkindly. "We've all tried." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. "What do you mean?" Hiroshi began packing additional supplies into a larger bag. "We should go to your injured friend first. Explanations can wait." "No," I insisted. "Tell me now." "What did he mean?" Hiroshi stopped his preparations and faced me directly. His eyes held the weight of years of disappointment. "There are 6 known entrances to this cavern system. We have mapped them all. We have tried them all." He gestured to his fellow survivors. "Between us, we have attempted escape 87 times. Some routes lead to dead ends, others to underwater passages too long to swim, still others to chambers with no air. There has to be a way," Kathleen said, her voice tight with the beginnings of panic. "Perhaps," Hiroshi conceded, "but in 15 years I have not found it. Malcolm has not found it in 29. Jorge has not found it in 47. He hefted his bag. Now, your friend needs medicine, or he will be first of your group to die here. Shall we go?" The bluntness of his statement jolted me back to our immediate crisis. Gordon needed help, and quickly. "Yes, let's go." As we prepared to leave, I noticed a wall in Hiroshi's shelter that I hadn't seen before. It was covered with photographs, ID cards, and handwritten names, dozens of them. "Who are they?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Hiroshi glanced at the wall. "Those who came before, those who did not survive." He picked up his spear. "Come. We must hurry if your friend is not to join them." We left the settlement, accompanied by Hiroshi, Naoko with her medical supplies, and 4 of the Trudon. As we retraced our steps through the jungle, my mind raced with questions. But one fact stood out starkly. According to Hiroshi, no one had ever found a way back to the surface. I felt the weight of Hiroshi's words sink into me as we trekked back through the dense prehistoric vegetation. No one had escaped in 15 years. My mind refused to accept this as our fate. The path ahead was illuminated by the soft bioluminescence of the surrounding fungi, casting everything in an eerie blue glow. One of the Troodon clicked its teeth, alerting us to something moving in the underbrush to our left. The creature darted forward, investigating before returning to its position beside Hiroshi. "These escape attempts," I said, breaking the silence. "Tell me about them." "All 87. Hiroshi glanced back at me, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You do not accept what I told you." "I can't. Gordon needs more than just medicine. He needs a hospital, proper medical care." Naoko, walking ahead with her medical supplies, spoke without turning around. "Your friend may not survive the journey even if we found a way out." I quickened my pace to walk alongside Hiroshi. "The other survivors at your settlement, have you tried working together? Pooling resources?" "Of course." Hiroshi's voice was patient but tired, like he'd had this conversation many times before. "The first attempts were desperate. Swimming through flooded passages. 3 people drowned." Johnny, who had been quiet since leaving the settlement, asked, "What about climbing?" There must be some vertical passages. Hiroshi nodded. 28 climbing attempts. The rock is too slick, too unstable. Malcolm fell 60 feet in 1998. Broke both legs. We almost lost him. I pressed for more details. What about the way we came in? The underwater passage? The current is too strong to swim against, Hiroshi said, and the water pressure would crush anyone without protection. We walked in silence for a minute as I processed this information. The jungle seemed to close in around us, the air thick with moisture and the scent of decay. There must be something you haven't tried, I insisted. Hiroshi stopped walking and turned to face me. The Troodon halted as well, their eyes reflecting the bioluminescent light. The cavern system connects to the ocean at certain points, he said carefully. During extreme low tides, some passages become accessible, but the currents, he shook his head. They are like nothing you have seen. 2 of our group tried during the spring tide 4 years ago. We never found their bodies. I tried to visualize the underwater geography. But with proper equipment, we have salvaged what we could from various accidents over the years, Hiroshi said. Nothing sufficient to withstand those currents. We resumed walking, and I fell into step beside Kathleen, who had been documenting specimens as we moved. She leaned close to me and whispered, "He's telling the truth, Tim. I've seen how water behaves in restricted cave systems. The pressure differential creates currents strong enough to pull apart metal." I nodded but wasn't ready to give up. When we get back to Gordon, I want to see what equipment Hiroshi has salvaged. We reached our camp 20 minutes later. Jennifer was kneeling beside Gordon, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead. She looked up as we approached, relief washing over her face. "Thank God," she said. "His fever's getting worse." Naoko moved forward immediately, kneeling beside Gordon and opening her medical pouch. She examined the infected leg, her movements efficient and practiced. From her bag, she removed several packets of dried fungi and a small mortar and pestle. "This will take time to prepare," she said. "The infection is advanced." While Naoko worked, I turned to Hiroshi. "Show me what you've salvaged over the years. Everything you've collected that might help us build something." Hiroshi hesitated, then nodded. "It is not far from here. We keep a storage area near where most vessels come to rest." I asked Johnny to stay and help Kathleen assist Naoko with Gordon's treatment. Jennifer offered to come with us, but I asked her to continue monitoring Gordon's vitals. I needed her expertise with the atmospheric readings later. Hiroshi led me through a narrow passage I hadn't noticed before, which opened into a larger cavern. The space was filled with what looked like a junkyard of mangled equipment. Pieces of metal, torn submersibles, old diving gear, and electronic components were arranged in neat piles. "Everything we have recovered," Hiroshi said, gesturing to the collection, "spanning nearly a century, I believe." I moved through the salvage yard, examining each piece carefully. There were parts from what looked like a 1960s research vessel, components from military submersibles, and even older wooden pieces that might have belonged to 19th century diving bells. My mind began cataloging each item, assessing what might be salvageable. "This is from a Soviet-era deep-sea research pod," I said, running my hand along a curved metal panel. "And this pressure gauge is military grade." Hiroshi nodded. "We have attempted to repurpose many of these components over the years. The problem is power. Nothing we have constructed has been strong enough to overcome the currents." I continued examining the collection, ideas forming in my mind. What about combining these with parts from the Odysseus? Our reactor housing is damaged, but some of the propulsion systems might still be functional. Hiroshi's expression changed slightly, showing interest for the first time. "What are you thinking?" A small submersible, I said, piecing it together as I spoke. Not to navigate the currents directly, but to find another way out. Something that could withstand pressure changes and provide oxygen for at least a few hours. I picked up what looked like part of a pressure hull from a deep-sea exploration vehicle. It was dented, but intact. Next to it lay hydraulic systems that might still work, if reconfigured properly. The more I looked, the more I became convinced we could build something functional. "This might work," Hiroshi admitted, picking up a piece of equipment I recognized as an oxygen recycler. "But it would take weeks to construct, even with your help." "We don't have weeks," I said, thinking of Gordon. "But maybe we don't need to build something perfect. Just something that works long enough to get us to the surface." We spent another hour examining the salvage, identifying the most useful components, and discussing how they might interface with the Odysseus systems. Hiroshi's knowledge of the equipment was impressive, and I realized he had been planning something similar for years, but lacked certain crucial components that our submersible might provide. When we returned to camp, Gordon was looking marginally better. The color had returned to his face, and his breathing seemed less labored. Naoko was applying a poultice to his leg while Jennifer monitored his temperature. "The fever has dropped slightly," Jennifer reported. 101.8 now. "But Tim, while you were gone, I found something." She stood up and retrieved her atmospheric analyzer. "I've been taking readings every 15 minutes and I noticed something strange. There are regular pressure changes in the air." I took the analyzer from her and studied the readings. Sure enough, there was a clear pattern of fluctuations occurring approximately every 6 hours. "What does it mean?" I asked. "It means there's a connection to the surface somewhere nearby," Jennifer said, excitement edging into her voice. "These readings are consistent with tidal influences on a partially enclosed space." Hiroshi looked surprised. "You believe there is an opening we have not found?" "Not just an opening," Jennifer said. "A direct path. The pressure wouldn't fluctuate this consistently otherwise." I turned to Hiroshi. "We need to find this passage. Can your Trudon help us track the source of the air currents?" Hiroshi nodded slowly. "They are sensitive to such things. We can try." With Gordon stable enough to leave in Naoko's care, we assembled a search party consisting of myself, Jennifer, Johnny, Kathleen, and Hiroshi, along with 4 of the Trudon. The creatures moved ahead of us, their heads swiveling as they analyzed the air currents. Jennifer kept her analyzer out, watching the readings change as we moved through the cavern system. "The pressure differential is increasing," she reported as we entered a narrow passage. "We're getting closer." The passage widened into a large chamber with several branching tunnels. The Trudon moved purposefully toward one on the far side, their clicking sounds echoing off the walls. We followed them into a tunnel that sloped upward, the air growing noticeably cooler. After 20 minutes of climbing, we reached another chamber. This one was dominated by a vertical shaft that disappeared upward into darkness. Jennifer aimed her light toward the ceiling, but the beam couldn't reach the top. "This is it," she said, checking her analyzer. "The pressure changes are strongest here." I approached the edge of the shaft and looked up. Water stains on the rock walls indicated regular flooding. Loose debris at the bottom suggested powerful water movement. "How far up does it go?" I asked Hiroshi. He shook his head. "We discovered this shaft years ago, but never found its end. Our lights could not reach the top, and the walls are too smooth to climb." I picked up a small rock and threw it into the center of the shaft. We listened, but heard no sound of impact. "Miles, maybe," Johnny said, looking up. "If it reaches all the way to the surface." Hiroshi placed his hand on the rock wall, feeling the moisture. It floods regularly with the tides. That is why we never attempted to climb it. Anyone caught in here when the water rises would drown. I stood at the edge of the shaft, my mind racing with possibilities. What if we don't fight the water? What if we use it instead? Everyone turned to look at me. The Odysseus has an emergency escape pod, I explained. It's designed to withstand extreme pressure and float to the surface in case of catastrophic hull failure. We never deployed it because we were trapped under the rock shelf. But it's still attached to the Odysseus? Jennifer asked. I nodded. It's small, only big enough for 3 people under normal circumstances. But if we modified it using some of the components from Hiroshi's collection, we might be able to fit more. And you think the water current could carry it up this shaft? Kathleen asked, skepticism clear in her voice. With the right timing. Yes, I said. When the tide comes in, the water rises through this shaft with enormous force. If we can harness that force while maintaining a sealed environment. Hiroshi was nodding slowly. It could work. But the timing would need to be perfect. Enter too early and you might be crushed against the walls. Too late, and you miss the strongest current. How long until the next high tide? I asked. Hiroshi consulted a makeshift timepiece he carried. Approximately 4 hours. Not enough time to prepare, I said. But the next one after that? 16 hours, Hiroshi replied. That would be the strongest tide of the cycle. I looked at my team. 16 hours to build a vessel that can get us out of here. Can we do it? Jennifer nodded immediately. The emergency pod is still intact. I checked it during our inventory. I can help modify it to fit more people, Johnny added, and Kathleen's environmental expertise will be crucial for the life support systems. We'll need to transport Gordon carefully, Kathleen said. His condition is still critical. I will help, Hiroshi said, and I will send for Malcolm and others from the settlement who have engineering knowledge. The plan was taking shape in my mind. We would detach the emergency pod from the Odysseus, modify it using components from Hiroshi's collection, and position it in the shaft just before high tide. If our calculations were correct, the rising water would carry us upward, potentially all the way to the surface. Let's get started, I said. We need to move the pod from the Odysseus to this location, and we need to gather all the necessary components. We divided into teams. Jennifer and I would work on detaching and transporting the emergency pod. Johnny and Kathleen would select and prepare the additional components from Hiroshi's collection, and Hiroshi would coordinate with his people to assist with the modifications. As we were about to leave the chamber, a low, rumbling sound stopped us. The ground beneath our feet trembled slightly, and small rocks dislodged from the ceiling, clattering down around us. What was that? Jennifer asked, her voice tense. Hiroshi's expression darkened. Seismic activity. It happens occasionally, but... Another tremor shook the chamber, stronger this time. One of the Troodon made a high-pitched warning call. We need to get back to the settlement, Hiroshi said urgently. I have monitoring equipment there. We hurried back through the tunnels, the tremors continuing intermittently. When we reached Hiroshi's quarters, he immediately went to a makeshift seismograph constructed from salvaged parts. The needle was jumping erratically across the paper. This is not normal, he said, studying the readings. The pattern suggests a major shift in the tectonic structure supporting this cavern system. As if to emphasize his point, another tremor shook the room, strong enough to knock items from shelves. Hiroshi moved to another instrument, this one measuring air pressure and temperature. His face paled as he read the data. The pressure is changing too rapidly, he said. And the temperature in the lower caverns is rising significantly. What does that mean? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Hiroshi looked up, his expression grim. It means the cavern system is becoming unstable. The seismic activity has likely compromised the structural integrity of the lower chambers. If the pattern continues... Another violent shake interrupted him, this one lasting several seconds. We heard shouts from outside as people reacted to the tremor. When it subsided, Hiroshi finished his thought. If the pattern continues, we are looking at a catastrophic collapse of the entire ecosystem. Water will flood in from the ocean, the air pockets will be crushed, and everything here will be destroyed. How long do we have? Jennifer asked. Hiroshi studied the readings again. Based on the escalation pattern, hours, not days. The reality of our situation hit me like a physical blow. Our 16-hour timeline had just been dramatically shortened. How many hours exactly? I demanded. Hiroshi calculated quickly. The rate of collapse suggests 6 to 8 hours before the main chambers are compromised. Perhaps less if the tremors intensify. I looked at my team, seeing the fear in their eyes. Then we have 6 hours to build our escape vessel and get out of here. Not 16. Another tremor shook the room, stronger than the last, emphasizing the urgency of our situation. Dust rained down from the ceiling as the prehistoric world around us began to tear itself apart. "Let's move," I said. "Now." The ground beneath us continued to tremble as we raced back toward the Odysseus, each minute feeling more precious than the last. The ground shook again as I tightened the last bolt on the modified escape pod's hatch. My knuckles scraped against the metal, drawing blood, but I barely noticed. We'd spent the last 5 hours cannibalizing parts from the Odysseus and Hiroshi's collection of salvage to transform the standard 2-person emergency pod into something that might, with luck and physics on our side, carry 8 people to the surface. "How much longer?" Jennifer asked, her voice tight with anxiety, as she handed me another wrench from our dwindling tool supply. "Almost there," I said, wiping sweat from my forehead with my sleeve. "Just need to check the seal one more time." Another tremor rocked the cavern, stronger than the last. Chunks of rock crashed down around us, smashing into the ground just feet from where we worked. One of the Trodons screeched and darted away into the shadows. The tremors were getting worse, coming more frequently. The entire underground world was beginning to tear itself apart. I looked over at Gordon, who sat propped against a rock wall. His color had improved thanks to Naoko's treatment, but he was still weak. Johnny and Kathleen were loading the last of our salvaged equipment and samples into waterproof containers. Hiroshi approached me, his expression solemn. "The seismic sensors show increasing instability throughout the lower caverns. Magma is rising through old channels that have been dormant for millennia." "How long?" I asked. "An hour, maybe less," he said quietly. "The next high tide comes in 20 minutes. It will flood this chamber completely." I nodded, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. "Then we need to move now." Hiroshi turned to his group. 11 survivors who had built lives here over years, even decades. Some looked afraid, others resigned. After 15 years underground, Hiroshi had become their de facto leader. "We've discussed it," he told me, his voice steady. "Most of us have decided to stay." "What?" I stared at him in disbelief. "But you'll die here." "This has been our home," he said simply. "We've adapted. Many of us are too old or weak to survive the journey, even if your pod works, and there is no guarantee it will. But 2 will go with you," Hiroshi continued. "Tomas and Eliza. They're young. They should have a chance to see the world again." I wanted to argue, but another violent tremor interrupted us. A massive section of the cavern ceiling collapsed about 30 yards away, crushing a stand of prehistoric ferns. The ground beneath us lurched sideways. "Everyone who's coming, get to the pod now," I shouted. Jennifer helped Gordon to his feet. Johnny and Kathleen grabbed the last of our containers. 2 members of Hiroshi's group, a tall, muscular man and a younger woman with short, dark hair, hurried forward. "I'm Thomas," the man said quickly. "This is Eliza. We were part of a research team in 2006. I nodded but had no time for introductions. "Get in, quickly." Water was already beginning to seep into the chamber from below, rising around our ankles. The tide was coming in faster than expected. I turned back to Hiroshi, who stood with his remaining group. The old scientist smiled sadly. "You were right to try," he said. "Perhaps if we had been more persistent. But this place became our world. We learned to live here, to study it. In a way, it's fitting that we remain." I grasped his hand. "Your research, all your notebooks. Take these." He pressed a waterproof case into my hands. 15 years of observations. Make sure the world knows what we found here. Another massive tremor shook the ground. A fissure opened up between us and I jumped back. "Go!" Hiroshi shouted. "Now!" I turned and splashed through the rising water toward the pod. Jennifer had already helped Gordon inside. Johnny, Kathleen, Thomas, and Eliza were crammed in the tiny space designed for 2 people, but now holding 8. I took one last look at Hiroshi and his group. They stood together, dignified, as water rose around them and rocks continued to fall. They raised their hands in farewell. I climbed in and pulled the hatch closed, sealing it with the modified locking mechanism we'd built. The interior was packed tight with bodies and equipment. I could barely move my arms to reach the control panel. "Everyone secure?" I asked, looking around at the anxious faces. Gordon was wedged between Jennifer and Kathleen, his injured legs stretched awkwardly across their laps. Johnny sat with his back against the curved wall. Our sample containers clutched to his chest. Thomas and Eliza were pressed together near the rear view port, looking both terrified and hopeful. "As secure as we can be in a sardine can," Johnny replied, attempting a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I checked the oxygen gauges. We have about 3 hours of air with all of us breathing. If we reach the surface before then, we'll be fine. "If," Jennifer repeated quietly. The pod rocked suddenly as water rushed into the chamber outside. Through the small viewport, I watched as it rose rapidly, swirling around the base of our vessel. Hiroshi and the others retreated to higher ground, still visible but growing more distant. "Here we go," I said, gripping a handhold bolted to the wall. The water level outside climbed higher, lifting the pod. We began to float, bumping gently against the rock wall. Then the current caught us, pulling us toward the vertical shaft we discovered earlier. "Hold on!" I shouted as we were suddenly sucked into the narrow passage. The pod shot upward through the shaft, propelled by the powerful tide. We spun wildly, thrown against each other as metal scraped against stone with an ear-splitting shriek. Sparks flew past the viewport. I felt the hull flex under the pressure, the reinforcements we'd added straining to hold. "The oxygen," Kathleen called out. I checked the gauge again. The violent motion was increasing our consumption rate. 2 hours, 40 minutes, I reported, trying to keep my voice steady. We continued to rise, the pod occasionally catching against narrower sections of the shaft before breaking free and surging upward again. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as we were tossed about inside our tiny metal bubble. I kept my eyes fixed on the oxygen gauge, watching the numbers slowly tick down. After nearly an hour, the violent motion began to change. Instead of shooting straight up, we were now moving in a more erratic pattern, bouncing off the walls at odd angles. "We're in a different passage," I said, peering through the viewport. "The shaft must branch off." "Are we still heading up?" Jennifer asked anxiously. I checked the crude depth gauge we'd salvaged from the Odysseus. "Yes, but slower." Another grinding impact rocked the pod, and a small stream of water began to spray from a seam near the floor. Johnny quickly pressed a container against it, slowing the leak. "The seal is failing," he said, his voice tight. "We're still rising," I insisted. "We just need to hold together a little longer." 2 hours into our ascent, the pod's motion changed again. The water outside became more turbulent, pushing us in multiple directions at once. Through the viewport, I caught glimpses of a larger space beyond the narrow shaft. "I think we're reaching the ocean floor," I said. The depth gauge seemed to confirm it. We were approaching the continental shelf. Suddenly, the pod shot upward again, faster than before. We were caught in a powerful current, racing toward the surface. The hull groaned under changing pressure, and new leaks sprang from several seams. We frantically tried to plug them with clothing and equipment. "Oxygen at 30 minutes, Kathleen reported, her face pale in the dim emergency lighting. The pod began to shake violently. Outside, the water grew lighter. Sunlight was penetrating from above. Hope surged through me, but I forced it down. We weren't safe yet. With a final wrenching lurch, the pod broke through to the surface. We were thrown against the ceiling, then crashed back down as the vessel stabilized. Through the viewport, I saw dark, churning water and glimpses of a gray sky. "We made it!" Johnny shouted, his voice breaking with relief. But my elation was short-lived. The pod rolled sickeningly as massive waves battered it from all sides. We'd emerged into the middle of a violent storm. "The beacon," I said, reaching for the emergency signal device we'd salvaged from the Odysseus. "We need to activate it now." I pulled the waterproof case from its storage compartment and flipped the switch. A small red light began to pulse, sending out our distress call. "Will anyone pick it up in this weather?" Gordon asked, his voice weak but steady. "They have to," I said simply. Hours passed as we drifted, at the mercy of the storm. The pod's interior grew increasingly uncomfortable, hot, damp, and filled with the smell of 8 people crammed together. Water continued to leak in, and we took turns bailing it out through a small valve. Gordon's condition worsened again, the motion aggravating his injury. Jennifer monitored him closely, but our medical supplies were nearly gone. "Look," Tomas suddenly called out, pointing through the viewport. "Lights!" I pressed my face to the small window. Through the rain and darkness, I could make out distant lights, too steady to be stars, too low to be aircraft. "A ship," I breathed. "It's a ship." The lights grew gradually larger. Our beacon had been detected by a passing cargo vessel. "They're coming toward us," Kathleen confirmed, her voice tight with emotion. The massive ship loomed over our tiny pod, its searchlights cutting through the storm to find us. A voice boomed over a loudspeaker, though we couldn't make out the words. Then a spotlight fixed directly on us. "They see us," I said, relief washing over me. The rescue operation was dangerous in the heavy seas, but the cargo ship's crew was skilled. They lowered a rescue boat, which fought its way to our position. Strong hands grabbed our pod, securing lines to the attachment points we'd built. One by one, we were transferred to the rescue boat. Gordon first, carefully lifted in a special harness, then Jennifer, Kathleen, and Johnny. Thomas and Eliza emerged into the rain, their faces turned upward in wonder at their first glimpse of sky in years. I was the last to leave the pod. As I climbed into the rescue boat, I clutched the waterproof case containing Hiroshi's research and our own samples: prehistoric spores, fossilized teeth from the Troodon, and the digital camera with hundreds of photographs documenting everything we'd seen. As the rescue boat pulled away, I looked back at the ocean. The water churned violently about half a mile away, forming a massive whirlpool. The underground cavern system was collapsing, miles below the surface. Hiroshi and the others were gone now, along with an entire prehistoric ecosystem that had survived in isolation for millions of years. The crew of the cargo ship, a Japanese vessel bound for San Francisco, helped us aboard, wrapping us in blankets and rushing Gordon to the ship's medical bay. They bombarded us with questions about our strange vessel and how we'd ended up in the middle of the Pacific Ocean during a typhoon. I stood at the ship's rail, watching the last traces of the whirlpool disappear as the storm began to abate. In my hands, I held the sample container, our only proof of what we'd discovered. I knew many scientists would dismiss our account as impossible, but the evidence we carried would force them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about Earth's hidden places and the ancient worlds that might still exist in the darkness below.